So welcome everyone. We are on week 8 of section, which is really exciting. Almost, I guess, exactly halfway through, which is great. So today we're going to go back to our original focus on a method. So it's been a few weeks since we've had like the Mills method week. This week we're going to talk about focus groups, and if we have time, a little bit about participant observation. We'll do less work on participant observation, most likely, for two reasons. One, we might run out of time. And for second reason, participant observation is happening less right now because no one can go into the field and do participant observation research because of COVID restrictions. So if we don't run out, if we run out of time and can't cover it, that'll be perfectly fine. So the plan for today, very quickly, touch on the midterm check-in. We spent more of last week on this, so we won't focus on it too much today. We'll talk about focus groups, have a bit of an activity. Participant observation will come next. I forgot to put the bullet point. Any questions, and then the wrap up for the week. If I've timed this right, we might finish a few minutes early, so just a heads up there. So before we begin, are there any questions generally about the class, or more specifically about the midterm? Any issues you're noticing, anything that should have been graded that hasn't been, that you turned in weeks ago? Any problems like that? Okay. Not seeing any. Please feel free to message me either publicly or privately if there's something that should have been graded that hasn't been, or feel free to email me. I will do my best to kind of grade if you bring something to my attention before Friday. Keep in mind, I for some reason have a final I have to take this week, so I will have to balance that, but I'll do my best. And I think I had graded everything that had been turned in prior to Monday that was not due on Friday, if that makes any sense. So anything that was due by last Friday should have been graded by now. Anything that's due this Friday hasn't been graded yet. Okay, great. Then we will just go ahead and transition to focus groups. So before we have a video to watch. Before we watch this video, does anyone know what a focus group is? What comes to mind when you hear those words?
Would that be like a group of people that like a company kind of uses to like test a new product or something, or maybe like a commercial or something like that?
Yeah, that's a really common application of focus groups, absolutely. So companies or marketing research firms will use this to figure out responses to a product. Has anyone ever encountered this in social science research yet? Cool, so that's what we're gonna talk about today. Just to make sure we're all kind of on the same page though, I found this video that could explain focus groups better than me. So we'll watch that first. As you're watching, I wanted you to think about two things. First, the video briefly mentions the origin of focus groups. So if you can catch that, that would be great. If not, don't worry about it. And the second one, think about what questions might work best for focus groups. So in what scenario would a social scientist want to use a focus group? Let me know if there are any audio issues, but this should play, hopefully.
Why do we buy certain products or choose certain brands? This is the sort of question advertisers have always asked, and there are no easy answers. However, there is a handy tool that helps companies explore this and similar questions, and it's called the focus group. Until the 1940s, market research was often quantitative, using things like sales figures and customer polls to track consumption. But this changed during World War II. Sociologists Robert Merton and Paul Lazarsfeld set out to learn how unprecedented exposure to wartime propaganda was affecting the public. Instead of polling large numbers of people with straightforward questions and quantifiable answers, the researchers conducted in-person interviews, sometimes with small groups, engaging them in more open discussions. Later, this method was picked up by the advertising industry, with the help of consultants like Austrian-born psychologist Ernest Dichter, who first coined the term focus group. This new technique was a type of qualitative research, focused on the nature of people's preferences and thoughts. It tell marketers what percentage of people buy a certain product or brand, but it could tell them more about the people who do, their reasoning for doing so, and even the unconscious motivations behind those reasons. Rather than providing definite conclusions for business and sales, focus groups would be used for exploratory research, generating new ideas for products and marketing based on deeper understanding of consumer habits. For example, early focus groups found that contrary to popular opinion at the time, wives often had more influence than their husbands when choosing which car to buy. So Chrysler shifted gears by marketing cars directly to women. And Dr. Dichter himself conducted focus groups for Mattel to learn what girls wanted in a doll. The result was the original Barbie doll. So how does a focus group work? First, companies recruit between 6 and 10 participants according to specific criteria that meet their research objectives. They could be mothers of children between 5 and 7, or teenagers planning to buy a new phone in the next 3 months. This is often done through professional recruiters who manage lists of people who've agreed to participate in focus groups for payment or other rewards. During a session, participants are asked to respond to various prompts from the group moderator, like sharing their opinions on a certain product or their emotional reactions to an advertisement. They may even be asked to do seemingly unrelated tasks, like imagining brands as animals in a zoo. The idea is that this can reveal useful information about the participants' feelings that traditional questions might not get to. Beyond these basics, many variations are possible. A focus group may have 2 or more moderators, perhaps taking opposite sides on a question. Or a researcher might be hidden in the focus group, unknown to other participants, to see how their answers can be influenced. And the whole process may also be observed by researchers through a one-way mirror. But although they can provide valuable insight, focus groups do have their limitations, and one of the main ones is that the simple act of observing something can change it. This principle is called observer interference. The answers participants give are likely to be affected by the presence of the researchers, social pressure from the rest of the group, or simply knowing that they're taking part in a focus group. And because researchers often use a small sample size in a specific setting, it's hard to generalize their results. The findings that researchers do reach from focus groups are often tested through experiments and data gathering. Those put numbers on questions like how many potential customers there are and what price they'd be willing to pay. This part of the process changes as technology evolves. Focus groups have remained largely the same for decades. Perhaps when it comes to the big important questions, there's no substitute for people genuinely interacting with each other.
Okay, so I recognize most of that was about marketing research, but we still use focus groups in social science, and that was kind of briefly mentioned. So returning to our 2 questions, did anyone catch the origin of focus groups?
Was it that psychologist dude?
Yeah, so there are 2 related, but it's the psychologists who kind of optimized this for marketing research. So he was the one who termed the coin focus groups. The method was used previously by Lazarsfeld and the other person whose name I can't remember now, when they interrogated attitudes about the war. But yes, so this has been used both in social science, where it has its history, kind of its origin, and then it was named by the psychologists who optimized it for market research. Okay, and then the second one, this one wasn't mentioned, but what questions might work best for focus groups? As we're thinking about political science and research that we might want to do as a political scientist, what questions might we want to ask in a focus group that wouldn't work on a survey? And feel free to share aloud or in the chat. And there is also probably no wrong answer here.
Didn't they mention that like qualitative questions like were the ones that they used in focus groups? Because like you can measure things like quantitative things in like surveys.
Yeah, so these are questions that are best answered qualitatively, that shouldn't be kind of converted into numbers for quantitative analysis. That's good.
Are you just asking for like an example of like a focus group?
If you have one, go for it. Yeah.
Would it be something like they want to figure out the best type of wood for building, so they get like all the best carpenters in the land together and survey them what the best wood is?
Yeah, so that would be a
Is
really
that kind of
great,
how they work?
that'd be a really great focus group for either marketing or even for like architecture. Yeah, absolutely. Can anyone think of a political science example?
Yeah, I was gonna say like for politics, you could like a focus group would work better than a survey in the sense that like instead of just asking people like straight up, like for example, on like a questionnaire, like you know what their positions on social issues are, you could like get a group of people together to like discuss why they hold those positions and like if there's like a reason that they would change them or something like that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So when we think about political science or politics in general, we would think that people have preferences over political parties, political like policies that are going to come up, or even the members they want to vote for, the politicians. So focus groups might work best in a scenario when we want to understand what's behind that preference. You can always say, in the 2016 election, who did you vote for? And that can give you an answer, but it might not tell you why you voted for someone. It might not tell you kind of what motivated you to actually go out and vote. It won't tell you how you voted in the US context. In an international context, focus groups often take place in areas that have been underexplored. So if you're the first researcher to examine politics in a country, for instance, you might start with a focus group because you might not know what questions to ask. So you can start asking questions in focus groups and then follow up with a survey later once you've figured out kind of how does partisanship work in this country, and in what ways is it different from kind of examples that I'm familiar with. So for instance, we have a professor here at Michigan, Noah Nathan, who does some research in Africa, and a lot of his kind of groundwork for his research began with focus groups or with participant observation, which is a related qualitative method. So it's really good. I don't know why this is duplicated, my bad. What we're going to do next is a breakout room where you get to look at kind of the results of a focus group. So a few years ago, there was a team of researchers who used focus groups to interrogate the question of why people in Wales feel underrepresented despite being still engaged. There are some transcripts from those focus groups that you'll find in the Google folder in a moment. And then as a group, your job is to annotate the transcripts and then follow what the online document says. As a bit of a precursor to what you'll find in this document, what I'd like you to do is first read through the transcript. This could take up to 5 minutes, so I'm going to give you the 5 minutes to read it. But feel free to move on once you and your group have read through all of the responses. Once you've done that, I want you to think about the common themes that emerged as you were reading. These could look like, for instance, one theme could be dissatisfaction with members of the government. And that could be a theme that comes up. There might be others. And once you've done that, go back through the document and place some of those statements into that theme. Does that make sense? Might make more once you see it. Okay. So we'll spend probably about 15 minutes in breakout rooms. I will come through at about 6 minutes in just to see if everyone's on the same page. And you're more than welcome to kind of request help and I will join you. I believe the Google folder is here. Yes, okay. And then whichever group you're in will be the group document, just like always. I know that we got feedback about breakout rooms in class, and we will be implementing that feedback next week. So starting next week, you might see the same faces in your breakout room, but this week I did not have time to figure that out. So starting next week, that will happen. And okay, so your room should be created. Again, feel free to ask for help if you need help. And I'll come around in about 6 minutes to see kind of where we're at. All right, so welcome back, everyone. I was looking through the Google Docs and I jumped into every group, and y'all had some really great answers. So if we could share kind of one example from each group, that would be great. Some of them might match, and that's perfectly fine. So we'll start with group 5 and go backwards just to do something different. So group 5, what was one of your themes, and what would you call that theme? So what was the description you gave it?
So one of ours, we said representation. So at the beginning, like a lot of Welsh people, they were talking about like being unrepresented or underrepresented. Some of them because like they're young, but also just because like I think Wales kind of tends to fall in the background as far as like, you know, the territories like in the UK. So yeah.
Correct. That's awesome. Okay, group 4. Same thing. So what was a category and what did you think it means?
So we did devolution for one of them, which is the transfer of delegation of power to a lower level. So like from the central government to like a local government. And like an example of it was there was like one of the main topics they were speaking about. So it makes sense as like Wales is underrepresented. So they're trying to gain more power in parliament in general.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Thanks, group 4. Group 3, what was one of your concepts?
I think we basically talk about homogeneity in politics. And what does it mean? We said politics is dominated by rich, white, middle-aged older men, which the theme is brought up at the beginning of the transcript. And when the participants talk about their stereotypes when they heard the word politics.
That was great. Awesome. So group 2, what was one of your categories?
We had one of them was Welsh pride. So like any sort of like expression of like nationalism or like a pride regarding like a Welsh identity or like a desire to be a little bit more autonomous from England or from the UK in a way. We categorize that as Welsh pride.
Yeah, very good. And then group 1, what was one of your categories?
We had devolution, so like giving the Welsh government more power from like the national government, giving them more like their own autonomous control over Wales. And the excerpt we put in there was one of the people saying, "I always think, how do people in London know what people in Wales and Scotland want? So perhaps devolution is a good way of working past that."
Yeah, very good. Thanks so much, group 1. So I really like that group 1 gave this concept again, because it was a category that a previous group had also mentioned. Looking through the documents, if you have time, you can feel free to look through all 5 groups using the same link. It looks like 3 groups had very similar categories and 2 groups had very different categories from those 3. So we won't spend too much time delving into that, but thinking about kind of a focus group and having to go through and analyze your data from a focus group, do you think that this process is reproducible? So if you were to do this on your own and give it to your friend and say, look through this transcript and come up with kind of the categories, do you think it would be similar?
I mean, I feel like it's a very like subjective thing. You can read it one way and you can gather like certain key things that they hit on. But someone else might be able to gather other factors. So I think it's a very subjective thing. So I would say that they probably won't be able to reproduce the same thing.
Yeah. Does anyone think the opposite?
I mean, I agree that it's subjective for sure. And they could definitely they could find different things. But I mean, there's also a possibility, like just because of the fact that I think you said like multiple groups had very similar stuff, that like there seems to be pretty like clear like just themes and like keywords that they keep mentioning in the transcript. So just like stuff like representation, like devolution, and all that. I feel like a lot of people would probably pick up on the same thing if they're all looking at it.
Yeah, very good. So this is exactly the debate that we still have in political science and comparative politics all the time. Can we reproduce focus group research? Is it because we argue that scientific knowledge needs to be reproducible? One way that we might view this is by looking at the same transcripts, can you come to the same conclusions, which in this class, 3 groups did and 2 groups came to slightly different categories. But another way you can do this is if you were to have another focus group in the exact same place that matched some of these respondents' like identities and kind of affiliations, would you come up with the same result? And that would be a little bit harder to make the case, but it's possible. So really good job. Like I said, I think all of you were on the same page here. Very quickly, I wanted to give a nod to participant observation. It was briefly mentioned in that video we watched at the beginning of class that sometimes focus groups will occur where there's a researcher behind a one-way mirror observing what happens. That's a little different than participant observation, but the concept is similar in that a participant observer is someone who participates in an activity as if they were just a regular everyday person, and they observe what's going on around them and then make conclusions from those observations. Those look very different depending on the topic, the area you study, what country you're interested in. In anthropology, it looks different than it would in political science. But there's a few different ways that we've used participant observation before. One of the kind of go-to examples in American politics is Kathy Kramer from the University of Michigan. She actually currently works at the University of Wisconsin. She has a book called Rural Resentment, where she led both focus groups and was a participant observer and did a bunch of qualitative work on politics in Wisconsin. She also did a really cool project for her dissertation at Washtenaw Dairy here in Ann Arbor. So really cool work. But that's more of a common method we would use in comparative politics, where you would attend a rally or a protest and participate in the protest, but then observe what's happening around you. Yeah, it's really great. Because I know that everyone's on screens a lot, I do want to be intentional about kind of letting you go early. So I'm going to kind of wrap up and just use the last 10 minutes for kind of questions if you want to stay behind and ask questions. But I do want to do 2 things. So first, looking ahead, the schedule for sections. Next week, we're going to go over the Arab Barometer. It is one of your data exploration activities, but there are 3 other barometers that you can work with for other data exploration activities in the course plan. We're going to use the Arab Barometer to analyze a question, but you can also gain more familiarity with what to do there and then complete the other data exploration projects if you'd like. The following week, we don't have sections. Instead, sections will be extended office hours. So I can meet with you during section times if you would like, but you don't have to. Instead, you can use that time to rest or finish some assignments, or I'm going to repeat rest since that seems important. And then the week following, we have another simulation, and it's our last simulation of the semester. It's called the Peasants Are Rebelling simulation. I wanted to highlight this so that everyone knew to be in attendance on the 31st, the week of the 31st. I don't remember what day it is, because you have to be here synchronously for that. and then wrap up really fast. So this week we have these assignments due. It's kind of a lot, but they aren't that hard. So the midterm course plans due on Friday, as well as the reading quizzes, lecture attendance. You already have section attendance, Muddy's points, and then the chapter 6 or chapter 8 critical thinking essay. Next week's the exact same thing, except there's no midterm course plan, and the critical thinking essays for chapter 7. So that's all I have. Feel free to log off early so you can take a break from the screen, and feel free to stay on if you have any questions. Other than that, have a good rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey Hillary, we can do both the 6 and 8